me, don't shut me down, and I don't know him. He said, I'm not going to let y'all do it. And I'm like, what? He said, this young man is too young. He said, if he's all that he is, like you say he is, let's protect him until he's strong enough to face that. Because if he gets out there too fast, he'll get killed too early, and we'll never know how great he could be.
Yeah.
I sat back in my chair. And after that meeting, Howard Jefferson took me to a room alone and said, young man, you don't know me. You probably think I was trying to kill you, but I was trying to save you. He said, now, if you trust me, let me give you my phone number, and I'll be your mentor.
Wow.
And that's how I developed. I'm the president of the NAACP today because I listened to Howard Jefferson. That's how I get to the Lawson. That's how I get to. That's how my relationships grew in this city. And they transferred leadership to me progressively. Because you only make the transfer as an older person or somebody you trust. Not talent, but trust. So I'm saying I've been through those pains, and I'm saying there are a few older folk like Ron Reynolds. And you know, Rodney Ellis, a few older folk, they're mentoring us along. And but they care enough to guide you and not stifle you and then push you. The first time I ever really learned something, Reverend Lawson and Howard Jefferson and I met with an HIT superintendent. And in the meeting, near the end, the superintendent said, well, Reverend Lawson, I'll call you back with a report. Reverend Jefferson, I'll give you an update. And both of them said, no, you won't. We are the present and the past. Reverend Dixon is the present and the future. Call him, and whatever he says, that's what we support. That's how I came into leadership, because that anointing can only be passed down legitimately. If it's illegitimately taken, it would never flourish. Dr. King was nurtured by his predecessor.
Yes.
Well, most people, who knows the name Vernon Johns?
I do.
I know the Congresswoman does. She's probably solving conference problems right now. Listen, Dr. Vernon Johns was Dr. King's predecessor. At what church? Dexter Avenue. You see? And Dexter Avenue put Vernon Johns out, voted him out because he was too radical. And when they called Dr. King, they thought they were getting a young upstart who they could control. But Dr. King was smart enough to do what? Consult with Vernon Johns in private. And Vernon Johns mentored Martin Luther King. He had a PhD, but he sat at the feet of his predecessor that had gotten voted out of the church. If there was not a Vernon Johns, there would not be a Martin Luther King Jr. Somebody ought to give God some praise. I'm trying to tell you how this stuff works. Wherever there's a Joshua, there's a Moses. And we need to become the the Joshua generation who understands that we learn from the Reverend Lawsons, and we learn from Howard Jefferson, we learn from the Martin Kings, we learn from that generation that did it, because they were the ones who are known enough to change the Voting Rights Act, to get public accommodations, to get the Housing Act. How did he get all that on what they had to work with? I'm honored to be sitting next to you. That's why I don't have to say. You know why you're here, right? Yeah, you're here because you're already modeling the kind of integrity that the new generation of freedom fighters have to have. And that's what we're doing. Our Congresswoman has joined us. And we're so excited that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Reed is with us tonight of the 18th Congressional District. And I'll say this about the Congresswoman. She's almost omnipresent. I'm serious. I think she has a special hookup with God that she can be more than one place at the same time. But she's always there delivering substantively on behalf of her constituents in the 18th Congressional District and around the nation. Now, I want to say this, and I don't say this flippantly so. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson needs to run for Congress in almost any other state in the West. People look at her not as a district congresswoman, but as the nation's congresswoman. She's one of the few. Would y'all give her a hand tonight and welcome her to Congresswoman, thank you for joining us here on this evening. And I want to just ask you, if you jump right in, you are fighting at the federal level. Of course, wherever there's a fight for righteousness and justice, you show up there. But talk to us about why the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that you loved and knew the congressman personally, who fought for so long. You understood the battle. You understood his passion, and you gave it all you have. You're still doing that. Why is it that in 2023, we're still wrestling with such basic and fundamental rights as voting?
Well, Bishop, if you would allow me to frame the response first by thanking you for giving us a cerebral moment, a moment that we pause on this day to really reflect on what Dr. King means to us and why the larger audience that is on the highways and byways, the ones that are outside of this door, the ones that are in the east to the west, the south to the north, in Houston, who may be just getting home or knew there was a holiday today, but it didn't reach their level of importance, that they should take a moment to pause. Glad to see such a richly diverse audience even here. And so to Sasha and Tanisha, grateful for the organizations that you've organized. I think it is important to know that when Representative Ron Reynolds represents the Black legislature, he represents all people. No one can be elected and not have a potpourri of human beings in their district. So they may be a descendant of an enslaved African, but they represent Caucasians and Hispanics and Asians, Southeast Asians and Asian Pacifics and Africans, just an array of people, Latinos, of course, just an array of people. You can't help it in this community. So I know that it goes as well for the leadership of Representative Charles Johnson. He can't help but represent just a myriad of people. Let's make that very clear. So when I want to enunciate what Dr. King means to me and what he means today, I want to be very clear that what I perceived him in the time of his life was that Dr. King did not follow the norm. Dr. King was outside of the norm. It is often said to elected officials, it's often said to appointed persons, it's often said to pastors, just stay within your lane. Just make sure you do what is expected of you. Just be a congresswoman that gets on a plane, flies from one place to the next, which is usually your district, and then to Washington, and that'll be enough. That'll be enough. So if an apartment complex in Humble, Texas has no water, that's really not what you need to be doing. If people are without the ability for testing and vaccines for those 2 years, well, that's not really what you are to be doing. You are to stay in your lane. Dr. King shocked the conscience of America primarily because he did not stay in his lane. The pastors, the national pastors in Birmingham, it was the Birmingham pastors, and it was as well, they drew upon the national clergy, gave him the letter while he was in jail and said, brother, you are not doing what a preacher does. Stay in your lane, go to a meeting when the folk downtown need it, and calm those in your churches like the folk downtown need you to do, We'll give you one or two victories that you can go back to the church with, but stay in your lane. No significant change will come. I think it is important for those who are not in this room to understand there is something valuable about not going in the norm. That is how Dr. King made leaps and bounds by not being in the norm. You would not have probably been as excited about his oratory genius if he did not translate those words into action. So what I take from him, and I'm a student of Dr. King. I have a young son by the name of Jason Cornelius Bennett Lee, and he is likewise, which makes a mom proud. I'm a student of Dr. King. He will quote for me in our conversations on the phone from Dr. King's words. He has given us a living secular Bible on how we can live our life and make a difference. So that is why you saw him going back to places. Why he went back to Memphis after they had a violent encounter. He went back. Somebody would have wished that he had said, I'm finished. They had their march. They made their point. But he made a commitment that he was going to come back. Out of the norm. The norm would have been, I hit that spot. It may not have been as best as I would like it, but, I hit that spot. Selma was the same thing. He couldn't get there when they first marched, when John Lewis was almost beaten to death. But he came back, and they made that journey, completed it, in spite of the trepidations of the White House. With good lawyers like Thurgood Marshall, they made that march from Selma to Montgomery. Why? Because Dr. King thought out the norm. How does that translate to this very time in 2023? No matter what your walk of life, you need to be thinking and acting out of the norm. And Dr. King always reminded us that our survival was in nonviolence. So it does not suggest I think even today he would be singularly promoting nonviolence. He just couldn't get it out of his DNA. And he was able to effectively use nonviolence and nonviolent protests effectively. The thing that he was brazen about is that he didn't allow the containment of laws, court decisions, to tell him he could not use the Constitution, which said he can protest. And so when they tried to use the injunction on him, he was going to protest. They were going to just have to round them all up. I want to use that in terms of how we characterize today. And I just want to say this quote. Again, just finding any one of his books, you will be immersed in some good stuff. Some absolutely good stuff. Which is one of the reasons I see in both Sheila and Polonius, who are here today, George Floyd's brother and sister-in-law. They could have taken the viciousness of what happened and been sinister, mean, angry, not wanting to do anything. But they acted out of the norm. They want to do good. They want to be productive and constructive in Georgia's name. So out of the norm today is the unacceptance of homelessness. But you see, it cannot just be the government doesn't accept it. It has to be a collective community view that I'm going to not accept homelessness and I'm not going to look at them in such distaste because it's their fault and I wish they'd get out of my eyesight. Think out of the norm. My good friend, Congresswoman, now Mayor of LA, I was with her when she announced that homelessness is a crisis in Los Angeles. She went out of the norm. She could have been talking about let's get infrastructure and get the trains working and do something that get the freeways clear. But she said the crisis is in people being unhoused. Dr. King said, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small. Being locked up in jail because you violated the injunction not to march are small compared to the wounds to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. 2023, that's relevant. When you look the other way. So to answer specifically your point, and I need a diverse audience to be here. I need a diverse audience to be here. I'm going to try to be brief on this one. Lauren Boebert attacked me last night on Twitter because of legislation that I introduced that was an amendment of legislation that says that if you perpetrate a crime or violence against someone based on their race, their ethnicity, their religion, we can all stomach that. I probably, a decade ago, now King, they couldn't stomach. That's an actual law in the hate crimes bill. And you get a federal law, federal penalty. I introduced and amended it called the Laws Bill and indicated and white supremacy. I didn't say white people, I said white supremacy. If that generates an action of death or crime against you, or death or a crime perpetrated against you, driven by white supremacy, that is a federal crime. Now, I didn't make that up. The FBI director appointed by President Trump said that white supremacy is the major domestic terrorist issue that we're dealing with in the United States. Testified before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. Not Sheila Jackson Lee. Said white supremacy. White supremacy killed folk in Buffalo. Replacement theory. It killed the folk in Mother Emanuel in South Carolina. It killed the folk in El Paso, Hispanics, with someone who drove all the way because he hated Hispanics. But when she attacked me, it was because I said white people. Now, it's difficult as a legislator when you don't read the bill. I don't know how to handle it. You introduce a bill and someone is on the floor, they never read it. So I took about 17 paragraphs, and that's difficult in Twitter, to go point by point to say maybe she could read the bill, or maybe she could hire someone to read the bill. I cited the section of what I meant. I cited the testimony of Director Ray, appointed by Trump, that said that white supremacy, he didn't say white people doing things, he said white supremacy, which, by the way, there could be people of color promoting white supremacy, if you understand what the philosophy is. She didn't get that either. And that it was not a violation of the First Amendment because she can speak white supremacy all day and every day. She's protected by the First Amendment. If she wants to be a white supremacist, she can do it all day. She's protected by the First Amendment. But when that moves to the invasion of your space, and you wind up dead like the people in Buffalo, or dead like the people in El Paso, or dead like the people in South Carolina, or dead in other places, the Tree of Life synagogue in Pennsylvania, that was an immigration issue, then you have taken white supremacy, and I have either been injured or you lost my life. I just quickly do that point to say that you've got to realize that we need out of the norm people. We need these folk that are out of the norm. We need legislators to be out of the norm. So what happens is, I'm going to bring you to this. What happens is that the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act, that is no less complicated than the 1965. It is, the concept is not complicated. It is being made complicated because the Shelby case wrongly said that we didn't need it anymore. Y'all already finished. There's too many of you anyhow in office or running or voting. And so once you took it away, and Justice Ginsburg said, you don't take an umbrella away in a rainstorm, and just because you don't see polio, you don't stop getting the polio vaccine. But Justice Roberts and the majority would not get their mind to understand that we as a people are always being limited And our brothers and sisters that don't look like us, they need to jump in to be able to say, no, the voting rights. So what the fight is on voting rights is that we don't have enough folk that are different jumping in and saying, give these folks voting rights, because when you give it to them, it really is, when I speak about voting rights on the floor of the House, I talk about everybody. I said everybody needs an unfettered right to vote. Everybody should not have lights going out, plugs not working, machines not working, intimidating you at the polls, and I'm not labeling anybody at the polls, that they're doing the rules of the polls. I want to finish on one point, Bishop, as you stand. Body language, but
You got the floor. I yield.
and so the difficulty of getting the bill passed is that we can't get some of our allies to be us, or even to be the folk in the community. Because people crying out for voting rights looks like a mosaic. I don't want to be intimidated when I go to the polls as an elderly person, or a disabled person, or a person that speaks a different language. Give me a break. I'm a U.S. citizen. Let me vote. One vote, one person. And so we don't have enough Dr. Kings that will think out of the norm, that's worried about what it's going to do against them, as opposed to saying that we're all better off if there is an empowerment of the American people to be able to vote. That we trust their judgment, as what happened in the 2022 election. On my side, we were not totally victorious, but we did something they had never seen before. We won in midterm election. It was amazing because the American voter said, enough is enough. I could not tolerate, though they struggled to vote. They struggled to vote in Georgia. They were scared to death. We struggled to vote in Texas. And there are a myriad of cases around the nation where people struggle to vote because we did not have the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act. So we got it out of the House. You know, there's something about having a tough speaker like Nancy Pelosi. We got it out of the House and we got to the Senate. And people would not think out of the norm, and they kept going around about the formula. How do you limit what states' jurisdictions will be covered by John Robert Lewis? And what I would say to them is, heck, let the whole country be guided by the right to vote and the protection of your right to vote. That would cure your problem. Once we say that, and then people say, oh no, I don't want a 50-state solution. Then when you start saying, well, then what states do you select? You're stuck. We're right here where we are. Let me just quickly go to this point, Bishop, just added, because you know I'm going to get this point in. The point is that I need the broader community to accept what we need in the civil rights arena, in the very large states. And our history is so significantly different from any other histories. Does not suggest that people's history is not valuable and important, but if you would accept without saying that we're trying to, in quotes, boast, and I know my friends will say, what is she saying? But we are the only population that came here and were slaves for over 200 years. And we cannot overlook it for people to say, I wish they would get on down the road. I wish they would go on. Well, if that's the case, then we should easily pass the John Robert Lewis bill. We should, because people should say, well, that's a bill good for America. Oh, it has something to do with African Americans. No, that's a bill good for America. That's what Dr. King marched for. And he marched, and when you write a bill, the impact of it goes to everybody. They don't say when Judge Zimmerman comes up as a citizen to vote, and we have given more rights, oh, I'm sorry, step over here, you can't get that right. He has an unfettered right to vote. And so the last point I want to make is, and I know is the out of the norm legislation that has been idling around for 38, 40 years. Now, Juneteenth, by the way, was idle around for a long time. And I pulled it out of the ashes. And everybody was celebrating like they had been part of the Jubilee for a long time. They were slapping fives, knocking each other down, how much work they'd done on making Juneteenth a federal holiday. You can talk about slavery all year long. Somebody comes and you just say, oh no, I'm just doing Juneteenth, a federal holiday. But the issue is the bill that John Conyers introduced after the 1989 signing of the Civil Liberties Bill. My friends in the Japanese American community, they are rabid supporters of H.R. 40 because we were rabid supporters of them. Ronald Reagan signed that legislation dealing with their internment in the 1940s. Out of the norm. But here we come with studying slavery and developing reparation proposals introduced for the first time in 1989, now given to me in the retirement and untimely death of John Conyers, and I have taken it from there up to the point of almost every member of the Democratic caucus, 217 votes that we had, to be able to set up a commission that would listen to you across America, no matter who you are, on this issue of slavery and the trajectory of the impact of it in the 21st century. And the question is, can we think out of the norm? I mean, I cannot go to the litany of things that we've done, but can we think out of the norm to say that that is a reasonable place for us to be as Americans, and a reasonable place that the world would look and say, oh, America is addressing their history, and they are prepared to be out of the norm and to be responsive to that history. I would venture to say, as I yield back to Bishop, that the things that Representative Johnson works on, Reynolds works on, has a woven impact of race. And when it has a woven impact of race, somebody is standing up and not happy with what they are doing because they are thinking race rather than thinking that this legislation can be applicable to all people and be good for all. And when Sasha and Tanisha and their organizations try to deal with out of the norm thinking, somebody is going to be there. When we try to deal with the absolute, how should I say, unthinkableness of George Floyd's death, can you imagine that there were people still trying to push back on us that that was a colored person's bill and not a bill that would help America? I finish by saying we can all be Dr. King, no matter what our racial background happens to be. But it has to be breaking the norm and doing the right and righteous thing to ensure that America reaches her higher angels. I'm still struggling with that. I still don't get the accomplishments that we should have because we're still facing folks that refuse to think out of their norm to be able to address what is an ongoing crisis of difference and race and an ism right here in America today. This is how bills like John Robert Lewis get stopped. This is how bills like H.R. 40 get misunderstood. I yield.
Let's hear it for the good woman. Something that represents all of us across this nation. Those of you who are screaming, I know that you're writing notes because this is classic. This is a classic conversation. I want to take a couple of questions from the audience at this time. If you have a question, you just step right to the center aisle. Just step right to the center aisle and ask the question there at the microphone, please.
Hi, my name is Sonia Jones.